One of the biggest issues that makes a lot of what is out there under the banner of personal branding icky is that it doesn't have a strategy, that people haven't done the thinking. And so it feels really superficial when it should actually be the opposite. It should actually be quiet and internal, and it should begin with reflection.
Welcome to Girls Make Bank, the podcast show for women who want to learn the art of selling for business and for life. I'm Jack White, seasoned sales professional, entrepreneur, and owner of Honeybees Group. Come back each week to hear inspiring stories from some of our favorite female business owners. Learn how to take the ick out of selling and make bank. We're all in this together, so let's get started. Buckle in, girlfriends, because we are in for a treat today. I am talking to Catlin O'Shaughnessy Coffrin, who is the founder of Captivating Consulting. Cat is a personal branding coach who works with women all over the world to craft the story of them. Every time I talk to Cat, I feel like I get smarter and I learn something new, and you're going to feel the same way. We dig into a lot of things today, but some of the highlights that I think are important is that as women, we often hide behind our brand in business without realizing that our personal stories is what helps sell our products and services. And so Kat's going to take us through how we really get to the why of what we do so that we can follow 3 pillars that she's going to outline for us so that we can craft our personal story and really connect with our customers in a more authentic and powerful way. Stick around. You are definitely not going to want to miss this one. Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love what you have named this podcast. And I love what you're doing. It's one thing that I'd love to see more and more of us talking about. So thank you for what you're working on.
Yes, thank you for being a part of it. I think we all do better and are better when we are sharing what we know with women and helping to lift them up, which I know is something you do every day in your business.
Absolutely. That's a big part of it.
So tell us, we're going to dig a lot into personal brand and how you can inject your personal brand into your business and your sales process. But first, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into the business of personal branding.
Thank you for starting with that question, because this is actually one of my very favorite stories to tell when I talk about this topic, and I'm sure you and I have covered this in past conversations, but one thing I actually really relish about talking about personal branding, and I suppose there's a parallel here with the work that you do on sales and making money, is how uncomfortable this topic makes people feel, especially the women leaders that you and I both serve and are very dedicated to and can identify with. And so I love to explain to people that the story of how I got into this work is actually tied to my own identity crisis that I had sort of midway through my career. And the point that I'm trying to make when I share that is that I came to this work from the same place that most of my clients come to this work, which is feeling like personal branding was not something I was ever encouraged to do, something I had sort of mixed feelings about. I think a lot of us feel like maybe it's kind of a TikTok generation thing because we conflate it with influencers and a lot of stuff that makes us feel icky. Actually, it's funny because personal branding kind of gets this bad rap as being all the things it should never be, which is inauthentic or like it's false or you're making up an identity when really it should be about coming back to who you are. So the way that I got into the work to tell that story is it was 2020. I had spent about 16 years, I was living in DC at the time, building my career, doing sort of everything right after undergrad. I had all of the internships. I put in my time. I worked for USAID and Sub-Saharan Africa. I worked in global green building with a large publishing company. I traveled to emerging markets, and I spent a decade helping to grow a global marketing firm that was a B Corp company that I really believed in. And it wasn't until I severed ties and I walked away from that business, I had actually built up our brand strategy practice over years at that company. And I really thought that I had everything it was going to take to go do this on my own. I was already scoping and selling brand strategy work for businesses. I could do this in my sleep. I knew what my market worth and what my market rate could be. And I was totally stunned to discover as I walked away from that business and started to reach out to my own contacts and kind of build my own business engine on my own, to realize that I had given so much of myself to my career, given over my whole identity. Like I think a lot of us who are achievers by nature, who really enjoy our work, If you met me in the 16 years before that, anytime in DC, I was getting married. I lost both of my parents. I had two children. But the thing I always wanted to talk about was work because it was the most interesting thing in my life. It took me all around the world. I met the most interesting people. So I kind of willingly gave myself over. And then I found myself realizing that in return, I had absolutely nothing left. So I'm reaching out to contacts that I had. I had a great network. A lot of us think, I just saw a reference today to LinkedIn as sort of a container for your network. For a lot of people, the baseline version is it's just where I keep all the people I've met. But they're not working on your behalf if you're not actually engaging with them and connecting with them and telling them what they need to know about you. So I had started to reach out to people in my network and my contacts, let them know I was available for consulting. And it was all the same work I'd always done. But the response and the discovery I had in that moment was that people genuinely supported me and wanted to support me, but they didn't really know what to make of me without a company behind me to define who I am. You need to look no further than the way that a lot of people, again, to use LinkedIn as an example, describe themselves on LinkedIn by companies they used to work at. You'll see a lot of like ex Meta or ex Google. That's how much we let our identity become completely conflated with where we work and who we work for. So when you step out on your own, you start having to build up sales, you have to have the confidence to do what you're doing and to be out front. The tendency is to want to go back to hiding behind a company brand again, when instead people are going to buy because of you. And it's your job to do the hard work to actually define what you stand for, why anybody should be listening to you, why you're in business, and then ultimately maybe sort of the last part of that funnel, how they can work with you. And if you don't do that work, it's going to be a whole lot harder. You're kind of putting the onus on your audiences or the people that you really want to help to figure it out for you. So this is about kind of taking control of your identity. And that's ultimately what got me into the work about 5 years ago.
I am nodding my head the entire time because what you're saying resonates with me so much. And I think a lot of people, especially over the past few years, because you said something really insightful, which is, you confuse a personal brand with influencers, because I think that holds a lot of people back. This idea of, you think how you should project yourself or how you should build your personal profile online is one way that we see all of these examples. And I can't wait to dive into, how the difference between personal brand and, building yourself as an influencer. Tell us, the personal branding and the storytelling, why is that such a critical part of the sales process, especially for sales people, sales professionals, entrepreneurs, specifically female entrepreneurs? How does storytelling play a role?
Well, there's two pieces. So especially where you ended there with female entrepreneurs getting into sales, the first thing that I really want people to do is just recognize that the system has conditioned us to reject the idea of talking about ourselves. And the reason they do that is because companies thrive on identity conflation, what I was describing before. They thrive on these ideas of bringing your whole self to work and of not keeping anything else just for you, because then you're loyal. They can keep you in place. You don't feel comfortable asking for what you're worth or what you deserve. And as nobody's surprise, women are much more likely to fall prey to that tendency than men. So to me, this is about something so much bigger and so much deeper than even just helping you sell, but this idea of reclaiming your identity and being willing to break through that discomfort, recognizing that it's there. There's nothing wrong with you. It's actually a part of the system that you have grown up in and our corporate working culture that makes this uncomfortable for you. People internalize that and think it's their problem, but it's actually about breaking out of that. So that's the first piece. The second piece, which I think anyone who's worked in sales or marketing or any kind of business leadership knows, but it's easy to forget when we're feeling maybe a lack of confidence or any form of imposter syndrome for all the reasons I just mentioned, is that business is about human connection. And so again, to draw a page from the LinkedIn example playbook, that is a social network. The people who win on LinkedIn treat it like a social network. They talk about what they know, but they intersperse it with what they're passionate about and with who they are and give people a flavor of what it feels like to talk to them on a day-to-day basis, because that's what people are buying from you. So there's a bit of an inversion from a traditional sales cycle. And we've talked a little bit about this before, because this is where your work and my work start to intersect. But the way I think of the LinkedIn sales, or the sales cycle that I have now with something like LinkedIn as one of my biggest drivers, my e-newsletter, speaking engagements. Those are really the biggest things that drive people. Getting my Fast Company bylines, things like that in my direction, is that everyone's sort of first connecting and saying, "Oh, you're interesting. I like what you have to say. I like how you engage. I like how you show up. I like what you seem to be about." And then they start to connect once they've bought into us as people,
Mhm.
as figures. Then they start to connect a little bit more with us intellectually. So, what is it that you're selling? Who is it that you're selling to? And ultimately, how could I work with you? And the discomfort that a lot of people have in this process is that they tend to over vector on the rational and the facts, and they start there. So many people that I talk to who probably are in the same stage of launching a business as the people you work with come to me and they're so fixated on defining the exact right set of offerings. And a lot of these questions are very good, but I've seen women entrepreneurs waste months fiddling with the exact right offering and coming up with some kind of methodology. And the truth is, nobody really cares about that until they connect with you. And you already have a really great reputation that causes people to love to work with you. A lot of this work is about allowing yourself to believe that, to look into it, examine it, put it into some words, and figure out how to use that strategically to get people into your funnel. You know, it's like an inversion, I think, of classic sales strategy.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so many people, women especially, do have this sort of perfectionism about, the bar is set so much higher for us in all areas of business. And so this idea of we can't put something out there in the world unless it's perfect. There's also these studies on, applying for jobs where men will apply for a position if they have 50% of the requirements. And for women, we need to meet all of the requirements. How do you, and I fall prey to this myself. This isn't, somebody else problem. This is a me problem too. How do you get your clients to break through that emotional or that mental barrier and get them to bring their authentic, real self to the table?
That is such a good, that's a big question. And it's a fantastic question. And honestly, it goes to one of the most important distinctions that I like to make between the work that I'm doing when I refer to this as personal brand strategy versus just personal branding. Because there's a lot that's out there that's really noisy. When I started this 5 years ago, even then it was a little more novel, and now it's kind of everywhere. And on the one hand, I love that. I think it reflects the way our economy has evolved since COVID. I think it reflects more autonomy that people, women included, are taking over their career, taking back some of that identity that they've always given over. Norms are shifting ever so slowly. So I'm excited to see that. But one of the biggest issues that makes a lot of what is out there under the banner of personal branding icky is that it doesn't have a strategy, that people haven't done the thinking. And so it feels really superficial when it should actually be the opposite. It should actually be quiet and internal, and it should begin with reflection. So when I'm working with people, the people who tend to want to work with me, and I just have a hunch, it's probably quite similar with what people find in you, because we're both working on stuff that's a little scary and hard, right? But that we know that we need to do well to build our businesses. But my approach tends to be about going back to where your story begins. And it is funny because in my interviews, I often start with, where does your story begin? And women will go like 3 generations back, which I love. I literally want to know where your grandparents came from and what happened the day they were born. It's a little too much context, but it's interesting. Men will often say, well, my last job was X. Context is so important here because that's a big part of how we talk about how we arrived on this earth, what matters to us when we're looking for purpose. It's not about, just find it in whatever's on the wind today or whatever sounds good to you. It's actually about digging really, really deep and looking back and asking questions that we never spend the time to ask. So we do 2 things to help them break through. The first is some internal pre-thought reflection. And I have a worksheet, it's about a page and a half, and it's a collection of the best questions I have found. Because our anecdotes, you talk a lot about storytelling. The best anecdotes are not things that we think of chronologically. They get stuck in weird places in our brain, and you have to jar them loose through practice, through commitment, through exercises. That's why I live for a good thought prompt. And I have people sit down and do that. And then we also reach out to 5 people who are champions, someone who's somewhere in between that Venn diagram of a personal and professional supporter, someone maybe you haven't talked to in years, but who will always be happy to hear from you, Could be a college intern advisor from 20 years ago. One I just spoke to one of mine the other day, actually. And we asked them three questions. We just say, hey, I'm working on my personal brand to help me grow my business. Would you be willing, as someone who believes in me, to answer these questions? The first one is, what would you say that my superpower is? The second is, how would you describe the way it feels to work with me when I'm at my best? And the third is the money question. What do you wish I celebrated about myself more? Because we're trying to get around that bias. People, to a person, if I ask them what their superpower is, they go to the thing that's hardest that they know how to do because they had to work hard to learn to do it. But the external feedback usually points to the things that they're naturally good at that they overlook because they've just always been that way. And in some cases, don't even realize that it adds value. The reason I share both of those in such great detail is because by starting off with those two exercises, what we're doing is we're deflating the inaccessibility of a topic like this by breaking it open, not trying to run straight at it. Tell me what your value is. That's a horrible way to define your value, but starting in a bit more of an esoteric, approachable way. And then I take all of that input and we walk through your life story. And then we walk through everything you've done professionally and you teach me about your job. Just worked with an e-commerce specialist today who was telling me about some of the early e-com websites that he worked on. And it was so fascinating to get to go back in time with him and learn about what was cutting edge then and how it shapes what's cutting edge and how he approaches things now and how he's grown up with this field and this specialty. So getting to learn about where people come from, the values, the ways they made decisions when they were 18, where they went to college and why, what was interesting, past they almost pursued and didn't. It reveals things about you. Getting input from others helps us break open your own bias. And I'm able to kind of distill and identify and define those core aspects of the personal brand that people otherwise have a really hard time accessing just by human nature.
I love that, going out to outside people, because oftentimes other people see things in us that we don't see in ourselves.
Yeah.
And we just, this is just how I am. This is who I am. This is how I do it. But you don't realize that that's your zone of genius. That's your area of expertise. That's that special sauce that you're bringing to the table that nobody else has. How do you translate all of that? And you translate, being real and being super authentic with also being strategic and, putting that into a business story selling position.
Oh, so good.
Where do those intersect?
So I think there's two pieces that I like to work on. The first is building blocks. I think of it almost like an hourglass, right? Like you're going out really broad and you're getting all this input, going all the way back to where you come from, et cetera, and maybe where your ancestors came from, and gathering all that. And then I'm distilling, because there's such a value in the process of having to be very specific and very selective. So what I look for is patterns, and then I start to distill, and all of that input becomes evidence and data points. And there's two sets of building blocks we build. The first is your personal identity. So say you're at Google, right? You're going to have a brand positioning statement, which is your strategy of what you stand for in the market and how you deliver. And then there's also your brand identity, which is the way that comes to life. The difference in the kind of sales we're talking about now and go-to-market strategy and marketing in general is that your brand positioning strategy is the stuff that a lot of us talk about in terms of what we're going to sell and why, the value and the benefits. But your brand identity is you. And I respect that. The value that you have to offer, what the offerings might be, the how we do it might be a couple, 3 or 4 sets of things that we do, or a description of your methodology, the benefit that it provides. And then I like to tie it when I can back to purpose, which is that kind of bigger question. Why should anybody care when you're successful at this? That's positioning strategy. That's one piece. And then I define your personal brand identity. And that is, again, it's your core objective for what is your brand trying to help you do. In this case, probably helping be out front with sales and connecting with potential target customers. A lot of people get that wrong, because if your personal brand strategy is wrong, everything's going to feel wrong. And then we get into your core value proposition. So it's going to have some echoes of what you do in business, but your core value prop from a personal perspective should be broader. Like if I picked Jack up and I dropped you into any setting and you looked backwards at your past and you said, what did I leave behind when I did that thing I do so well? It should be jargon free and not specific to an industry if we can help it. So value prop statement for who you are as a person and a professional, a persona, my favorite part, which is that, what does it feel like to work with you? I have a lot of fun with that. A lot of women have a lot of tensions, creative tensions, where we can be 2 or 3 or 4 conflicting things at once. And by virtue of that, we really capture what makes us singular. And then your purpose, which is ultimately what would make your life feel satisfying to you. We spend a lot of our lives working. Then we talk a bit about audience, which might be slightly different from your business audience. It might be a little bit more thought leadership in nature. And then what I do is I weave the two together into a core narrative that gives it voice. And that's essentially what I think you think of as the origin story or the brand narrative for a business. It should have all of those elements in it because it helps people understand us, what we're intending, why we're even here doing what we're doing. I don't know about you, but one thing that rings really hollow for me a lot of times when I talk to people who are coming to me for help with their business positioning is they're stuck trying to find a differentiator because they haven't gotten back to or they've been overlooking the value of why they're in business in the first place. Don't you find that such a gold mine for inspiration?
Totally. And I think, especially for women entrepreneurs who tend to be building businesses to solve a problem that they themselves had, that intersection of who you are as a person and what you do as a business and why you do it are very closely linked. So what you're saying, kind of a light bulb goes off in my mind because it's true. We think about, oh, I'm serving this need, I'm solving this problem for someone else, but it started with me and who I am and what I needed. And I just spoke to someone the other day who is building this really cool SaaS platform, and she had her own business, B2B business, and there was no place for her to market it and to find clients. And so she said, oh, I'm going to build this two-way marketplace to make it easier. And now this is her new business. So it's like she's building a business that solved a problem she had for another business. And so it's those kinds of like stories without any knowledge of her, why she started that first business in the first place, how it came to be. You just think, this is a marketplace. But it's that like story and it's that mission behind why she did this, which is to give other moms doing similar businesses like an easier time growing their business. Makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the key elements that every business owner should include in their brand story? And you touched on some of those, but like what are the 3 to 4 key things that need to be included?
The first element that I would put on my wish list is something that indicates a little bit about where you come from or sort of who you've always been. And you want a little bit of humanity. And that can look so different. I worked with another guy whose parents met as immigrants on a boat coming to America from 2 different countries. And we were able to play with that a little bit as a creative conceit to talk about like where his story began and these 2 worlds colliding and how singular his upbringing was. And for him, a lot of it meant about like this focus on belonging, and it defined his approach to leadership. So there's a lot of interesting ways to bring some of that context. We are wired to understand through context. So allowing yourself to bring a little bit of context into how you got here, even before you get to the next element, which is that spark, the origin story of the business, as you and I both talked about. So maybe there's a bit of where I've come from or what I've always been like. One I like to talk about personally is that when I was in 4th grade, my imaginary boyfriend was Ben Franklin. And I like talked about him all the time. I did all of my projects. I did a diorama. I carried around his biography. And I've thought a lot since then about what it was about me at that moment in time that made him so come to life for me. And there's so much elasticity to an anecdote like that that you can use. And then to think about how it brings me through this career that I've built, which I talked to you about earlier. And this crisis that I had after 16 years of climbing a corporate ladder and realizing I have no idea who I am anymore. But I also work in brand strategy. So maybe I can use what I know and who I am to figure that out. And this inventor streak of interesting ways to build new models, which goes back to my love of Ben Franklin. So that's the storytelling piece, right? It's an art and a science. You ask a lot about intention and strategy, and I think it's about bringing those things together. The story you just gave about the person that you worked with who was developing the SaaS product, what's so beautiful about that story is sort of the third component, but that origin and that spark of I saw this need, so here's what I did with it. One thing I find talking to entrepreneurs all the time every day is there's often an interesting gap between the moment of inspiration and the thing that we launch. And how do you take that insight and turn it into a business is a big part of how you got here, because it begins to help us understand how you sell what you do. And then I think the fourth piece is, so because of all of this, today I run Captivating Consulting, and I do this to help other women who are in the same position that I once was. I do this through speaking, writing, one-on-one coaching, and consulting engagements. That's the last part of the story. That's my wish list.
Yeah, I love that because it's what you said earlier, going back to sort of how you opened this is, people have to buy you first before they buy what it is you do. They have to understand you, connect with you, get your vibe, and say, oh, this is someone that I relate to, I can learn from, I want to work together. How do I do that? What does that look like? So I love that through line. What are some things, common mistakes that you see people get wrong?
One of them, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, is the tendency to think that in order to be taken seriously in our business, that we have to always be serious. And the most impactful things you do under the banner of your business are often when you share a little bit of who you are. I was just sharing a story. I'm working with a woman who's a CFO inside a global company right now, and she was asked to give an intro to herself and also a financial update at a global town hall. And she said that one of the leaders said at the last minute, could you add a little bit of something personal in there? And she was terrified. We had a coaching session. She's like, I don't talk about my personal life at work. Been here for over 20 years. I never have. And I think for her, she's a Hispanic woman. She's been promoted over a bunch of old white guys. They now report to her. There's a sense of I got here in spite of who I am. So why would I celebrate that now? But of course, we all know that really we need to turn around and bring people along. And we wove one element together. She has 3 boys who are grown. And we came up with a little conceit as she talked about being a mother. And she describes being the one who dispenses calm in the midst of chaos at home, and how similar that is to the approach that makes her successful in the finance world at this creative company she's at. And she used that to introduce herself. And she said the feedback that I got from people I've worked with for years, in addition to brand new people, was so strong because they felt really connected. And then they're dialed in when you're talking about your numbers because they've connected with you.
How does your story, how does your brand story play out differently depending on the medium that you're using? So your email newsletter, you talked a lot about LinkedIn versus, the conference or the, public town hall versus whatever it is. How does it stay the same and how does it differ based on, the vehicle you're sharing it on?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Maybe there's 2 ways to answer that. One is, I think for me, where I see storytelling helping me the most is bringing people in to the thing I want to say and meeting them where they're at to do that. So my target audience, primarily, not for everything, but my core audience that I'm most motivated to serve is women leaders 20 to 30 years into their career, because I intimately understand the challenges they face. I don't declare that when I write copy. Sometimes I do, but often I just go straight for whatever I think that is keeping them up at night and bring them in. Or I tell a story that might catch their attention and their imagination and bring them in. And so thinking about how I use a story to put people at ease, to build a connection so that they are rooting for what I'm doing, and to give them a sense pretty quickly off the bat about why I'm passionate about what I'm doing, something that founders in particular tend to overlook because they go straight for the intellectual knowledge they have to share. And so I modulate which story I'm going to choose for opening depending on what I know people might have in their minds. And I select a story that's going to help illustrate the point that I'm trying to make and bring them into the conversation. And I think there's a proxy for that in everything. With newsletters, what I always try to do is think about how I feel when I get newsletters. And I'm trying to make it feel very conversational. And so I will go back and brush over my newsletters at the end and make sure it doesn't sound too academic, because my tendency is to go straight to academic typewriting. That's kind of the world I grew up in. And I have to fix and course correct for that. And it's one reason I'm very passionate about committing to posting on a platform like LinkedIn every day, where it gives you the opportunity to not be too precious about things and try things out and see what feels good. And that is one of the biggest roadblocks for a lot of people, is that they just can't get over that hurdle because the perfectionist tendency.
The perfectionist. Right? That's right. That's right. And the work that I do, there's a lot of uncomfortable things that you have to do when you're selling and you're not used to selling. And, my push for my clients is always, well, just get started, right? Every time you get on a consultation call or every time you do something, it's not about being perfect. It's about being a little bit better than you were the time before and finding out what works. And it's the doing it again and again. And these little like testing and seeing what resonates and what doesn't. Yeah. Number one, you get better at it. And number two, you get more comfortable doing it, or you at least get more comfortable with being uncomfortable doing it. And then once you do it and you start seeing results, then the confidence comes into play. And then you want to tell your personal story. You want to get on more consultation calls. You want to do the thing that you were fearing and avoiding for a long time. And so I love that. Like, don't be precious with it. The most important thing is get started and do it. Have a strategy behind it. Have some thought process. Don't throw spaghetti at the wall, but start. Yeah, but start, because that's really where so many people fall down, right? How can we learn more about you and Captivating Consulting? Where can we find you?
So, as you know, I'm on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time there. I find it to be a really lovely place to connect with people. And then I do write pretty frequently, and I keep everything updated on my website, which is captivatingco.com. Those are the two best places.
Thank you so much. Like I said, every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm gaining a better perspective, and I'm thinking about my own story and my own sort of origin of why I do what I do, and how I can incorporate it into my business. So thank you so much for spending time with us, and I look forward to chatting more with you again soon.
Thank you for everything you're doing and giving me a chance to talk about this with you. This is what I live for.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Girls Make Bank. If you like what you've heard, please remember to subscribe, like, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Please review and share our show to help spread the word and help your girls make bank. And I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, or visit honeybeesgroup.co. Until next time, friends.